want to be recorded, feel free to disconnect and drop, and you can always view the presentation on our YouTube channel. So today's session is leveraging Purview to automatically discover sensitive data for on-premises file shares with customized reporting. I'm Tony Lantifame, I'm the moderator. We've got several presenters today. We've got Sergio Salinas, we've got Kratika, Mittal, both from Microsoft, and they are both compliance technical specialists, and we have Niharika Sharma from Quorum Cyber. So today, as I said, today's session is being recorded, and it's going to be posted to our SLG YouTube channel. The link will be provided later in the resource slides, and time permitting, there will be live Q&A at the end of the webinar. But feel free to post questions in the chat window throughout. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Kratika.
Thank you, Tony. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Tony said, I'm a compliance technical specialist at Microsoft, and my area of expertise is the Purview suite, which includes our data security, data governance, compliance, and risk solutions. I work primarily with state and local government customers, helping them address their use cases. And today I'm very happy to talk about the Microsoft Information Protection and IP Scanners with you. So to achieve comprehensive protection across your organization, it's important that you're able to detect sensitive information everywhere across your data estate, no matter where it is created or stored. That means having sensitive data detection capabilities across your on-premise file shares or data centers, on individual devices, as well as across cloud services and SaaS applications. There is no information protection offered by any competitor that goes across protecting sensitive data throughout the digital state and comprehensively across all environments. And Microsoft Information Protection gives you that consistent experience across services, apps, and platforms in heterogeneous clouds, hybrids, and on-premise environments. So you must have attended other sessions where we have spoken about how information protection is provided across multiple environments through Microsoft solutions. Today, we are going to talk about our on-premise security. There are 4 main workloads that allow the information protection to discover sensitive data. Data processed by the client applications are reported by AIP client here, and Defender for endpoint. Data stored in the cloud is scanned, inspected, and labeled using Microsoft Cloud App Security. And last but not least is your data stored in on-premise file shares and SharePoint. And that is where your AIP scanner comes to help you. So there are 4 steps which are included in information protection methodology. First is define the target repositories that might contain sensitive information. With the new network discovery feature that was just released, you can now map your file shares by scanning IP ranges and feeding the results into deep file content inspection. Second is the inspection of files stored in the scanned file shares and SharePoint on premise sites. The goal of this step is to discover what sensitive information is stored in these files. Third is to apply the MIP sensitivity labels on the files. Labeling enables users to be aware of file sensitivity and handle the files according to the organization's policy. And this allows other systems, for example, DLP, to use sensitivity labels for data exposure mitigation. The last step is to apply the protection as per the information protection policies on most sensitive files that require the right management enforcement. So scanner deployment is a journey, and information lifecycle changes the data landscape all the time. You will gradually onboard more repositories, find more files, to tweak your policies, and discover lots of useful insights from the data map created by the scanner. So these are some of the challenges that we hear from our SLG customers, which MIP scanners help addresses. So the legal team usually have the issues like they want to make sure that the entire data across the organization is discovered because the regulations like GDPR require all the files to be classified. The data owners are usually concerned about what is the data that is present in the first place? What about the data that was created before using the information protection? Would that be labeled as well? What about the files that were generated by automatic process instead of the end users? How would they be labeled? The central IT also usually is worried about the migration to the cloud because they want to migrate, but they do not know what is going to be migrated. So they want to make sure that they understand the security controls that needs to be implemented before they decide to move any data to the cloud. And Microsoft Information Protection helps you addresses these scenarios. So the scenario regarding the compliance with GDPR, CCPA, CGIS, and IRS, it can help you discover the data, label, and protect the data as per those regulations. On-premise scanner complements the MIP story in addition to built-in labeling in Office applications, AIP client, and built-in labeling of data at rest and SharePoint. So this allows you to ensure that your data in use, in motion, and at rest is consistently labeled and protected. The discovery of sensitive data in on-prem repositories helps you find where the sensitive information is stored. It includes discovery of overexposed file shares and deep file inspections stored on file shares and SharePoint on-premise. This solution also helps you create a report of the discovered data, including the sensitive labels applied on that data as per the auto labeling policies that you have created in your Purview. The third requirement, which is the enablement of migration to cloud. Scanner helps you decide what data can be migrated to cloud and mitigate the risk or address the regulatory needs by labeling and protecting data before it is moved to the cloud. So the scanner would help you automatically discover, classify, label, and protect your on-premise data, and it helps you understand your holistic data state and the protection that you need to put across all the data. This is the architecture of AIP Scanner. It's a Windows service installed on the machine that crawls the remote repository. It's recommended to deploy a dedicated machine for it because the surface is CPU intensive and memory consuming. And it's better to offload this work from the file repository itself. SQL database is used for storing the configuration acquired from the Azure service and to maintain an operational database, to keep the list of scan files and allow incremental scans. Now, AIP Scanner should have cloud connection in order to leverage Azure Portal to manage scanner and get the discovery reports. You can only use the protection in case of air-gapped networks, and scanning targets are accessed using CIFS and HTTPS for SharePoint. MIP scanners has multiple use cases. These are some of the use cases that Sergio is going to talk about and show you the demo of now. And I'm going to look at the questions in the chat and I'm going to be responding, or someone from the team is going to be responding. Over to you, Sergio.
Thank you, Kratika. And team, let me know when you can see my screen.
We can see it.
We can see it.
Perfect. Okay, well, hey there, SLG community, and those of you who will be watching this recording later on YouTube. I'm the guest speaker, Sergio Salinas, one of the guest speakers. I also work here with Microsoft, part of the compliance technical specialist, servicing our SLG community. And I'm thrilled to share ways to discover and protect sensitive data using Microsoft's Purview and how we can glean on that information in our on-premise environments. Today, we are going to kick things off with a bang as we shine the spotlight on our information protection scanner. So if you've ever wondered how to set this up, or how effectively can we safeguard our organization sensitive data on-prem, we will look at that now. I don't have too many slides because I will be going into the demo here, but do want to just call out a couple of prerequisites. As Kratika mentioned, it will run on a Windows server on-prem. So like anything else, we would want to meet those server requirements. We do have SQL server requirements as well. There will be some label configuration requirements since it will be leveraging your M365 environment. You'll need to have some labels configured there. The Windows server will also need an AIP client installed on it. And if you're going to target some of your SharePoint repositories, there are some requirements there. And last but not least, some of those Office requirements. I'm going to briefly just high level how I have my demo set up. And each one of these we will take a peek at as I get to explain some of the technical pieces of how this all comes together. But first things first, you will configure the scanner settings in Purview. And I also wanted to call out, you will do some configuration in Intra ID. We will look at how to create the scanner cluster, how to create a content scan job. And as mentioned, you'll need to create a Microsoft Intra application for the AIP authentication. So that's just a tidbit there. Next, we'll look to install IP Scanner prerequisites. Again, looking at that AIP client. I'm going to be, I do have an SQL Express running on my IP Scanner. I do have SQL Server Manager and set a few permissions on that database for my scanner. There will be some install IP Scanner on-prem instructions that we'll take a look at. I did create a few network shares, one for company shares, one for HR, and I did add some sensitive data to those file shares. And I have kicked off a content scan job, and we will look at some of that now. So as promised, not too many slides. Let me go ahead and close that. First things first, when we go to Purview, we'll be going to our compliance.microsoft.com. You will need to be signed on with one of the role permissions that will have the ability to work with your IP scanner. I am signed on with compliance administrator permissions. I will share some links and go through a couple of documents that will explain some of those details and requirements for getting this set up. But if we come down here to our settings, we will find our information protection scanner. And when we click on that, it will open up to this page. You'll see there's the clusters, the nodes, and the content scan jobs. The cluster is fairly easy to set up in a way. It's just beginning stages for staging what your information scanner will come into the M365 environment and associate with. So you would give it a name, a description. I've got two clusters running, the IP cluster 3 and 2, and they are associated to their corresponding scan jobs. So once you've created a cluster, you will create a content scan job. We will open up some of mine here in a little bit to see how I have things configured. But just high level, you can see the cluster name. You can see how I have it scheduled to always scan, how I have it set to enforce labels, the repositories it's targeting, the last scan results, and when the last current start time was and the last scan end time. If you were to click the add button here, you would open up to this general section. You would create your scan job name, give it that description, and give it a cluster to associate with. So this is, again, a way to prepare to pre-stage before you go on to your on-prem server and do your installation, okay? So we will go through more of these as we look at my particular ones. Okay, I did mention that it will use a Intra ID application. So here is my IP scanner, and I do have an enterprise application set up. There are some instructions on how to get this set up, but it will be used when you do your set AIP authentication. So you'll want to have those ready to go. Once that is set up, you can go over to your on-prem server where you plan to install your AIP scanner. As mentioned, this is my SQL database that is running on it. You can see here that my AIP scanner is on. Here is the corresponding cluster that this particular scanner corresponds with, my SQL instance, database, and you can see here I am on the commercial cloud. Most of your configurations will be done through PowerShell. So you will, when we get to looking at those quick instructions, you will see how that's used. It will set up a AIP scanner service. So you will get to look at some of that as well. Some of the links that I'm going to be showing here will be shared out as well, but these are those prerequisites. Again, some of those server prerequisites, services, SQL, down the list here. Once that is set up, you would move over to this document for configuring, installing the information scanner. So this gives you, those overviews and, a reminder of, how to sign on and get this set up. We mentioned real quick, setting up that cluster, setting up that content scan job. That's kind of that pre-staging to get things ready. And then when you get to install the scanner, this is where you get into your PowerShell on that on-prem server. So this is the command here that you would use. You would associate it with your SQL instance and the cluster that you staged in your IP scanner settings. Once that's set up, you would look to get your Microsoft Entra token for the scanner. Now, that's why I wanted to mention real quickly that you do need to set up the app registration, and there will be some instructions on how to set that up, where you would go into your Entra, you do your app registrations. It will walk you through your certificates and secrets, as well as the permissions that you will need to set on that. Once those things are ready to go, then you can go through and finish that installation. Let's go back to the server. When the scan job runs, it will create some local reports of how those scans look. This information, along with information in your Activity Explorer, will kind of list out how things are being scanned and whether things are being labeled, etc. So let's move back over to our settings here. And let's take a look at my scan job. So here is my general settings. Here is my repositories. My general settings, I can set how I want the scanner to run. I want give you, sorry about that. Thought I lost connection there for a second. These information icons where you can get more descriptions on each configuration. I do have my cluster set to cluster 3. I am set to always run my scans. I can change this to manual. Now, this information types to be discovered. You have two options. You can do your policy only, or you can do all info types. So I do have mine set for all info types. So it will discover any of the sensitive information types that may exist on-prem. And when my scan returns the information, share that. Or if I want to just focus on policy only, then if I have my automatic label policy set to look for things like credit cards or social, then that's all it will use to discover. Remember, these IP scanners run on-prem. They are they will use up some resources, and it's always best to have it very close to those file repositories, like your file servers or SharePoint, so that it has enough bandwidth, and you want to have the right processing for that information. So you can go through and you can enforce sensitivity labels. You can set default labels. Again, these are your general configs. On your repositories is where you can get specific with your workload scans. Here I am pointing to a particular repository. And again, some of those same configurations you saw on the general side, you can modify here for these particular scans if you want to set them here, or if you want to let it default back to what's on your general. Okay, you do have options if you want to set like custom default labels. If you want to relabel them, you have different options here. So let's look real quick at what some of those details might look like in our Activity Explorer. Make this just a little bit bigger. So here in Purview, under our Data Classification Activity Explorer, we get to see what's going on across our M365 environment, but we're going to focus on our on-premise location. So I'm going to filter in. And here you can see more specific to what's going on with my on-premise file shares. You can see there's some files discovered. Here a label was applied. If we click on some of these details on what a file discovery looks like over here, we can see that there was a file discover activity, when it happened. If there's a label event type, here there was none. You can see the file name. This is my IP Scanner user account that's running. It shows a sensitivity label that is applied, and it also shows a sensitive information type. So remember, on those scan jobs, you can be specific if you wanted to only scan information types that pertain to your auto labeling, or if you just want to scan all info types. So I'm more looking for the credit cards and socials, but you can see that because I'm scanning all info types for my discovery, I can also detect if other ones exist, okay? And you do get file locations. This is my on-prem file share. So just think of the analytics that is discoverable here. Here is that parent share, and this is the exact file path. I can see the data is at rest. I can see that there was the protection event unchanged. Is it protected? True, because it does have a sensitivity label. Was it protected before? This information was not detected for this particular instance. But if we want to look at some of the other activities, we can look at maybe a label applied. So here we can see the activity was label applied, when it occurred, how it occurred. It was applied automatically. We can see the file that was labeled, the user account, what it was labeled with. Again, with our parent location and the file path to that file. We can see that the data was at rest, that it is a protection event type new protection. Is it protected? True. Is it or was it protected before? False. So previously that document did not have an information protection label, but now it does. And you can see here the scanner, here's the protection owner. And if I were to go to this file path, that file is the CC data 1 copy document. This is that file path right here. This is that document. I wanted to click on it. I can see that sensitivity label is confidential internal. So a lot of good information that can be gleaned across your on-prem data estate, whether it's file shares or SharePoint services. Once it's set up correctly and you're able to detect that information, you can use your scan jobs to really drill in on those specific repositories and do some discovery, maybe do some relabeling. And there's more information on what you can do with this. You can integrate a DLP policy to your IP scanner. Now, the DLP policy is a little bit different in the sense that, when you think of endpoint DLP, it's kind of preventing a data leak or preventing some type of action. In these particular cases, when you enable a DLP policy and target your on-prem repository, you have options to find shares that have maybe been shared to everyone or all authenticated users and tighten up that file permission. And so this helps leverage some of the capabilities on-prem and cloud. And of course, with the logs that the IP scanner generates on the server itself, as well as your Activity Explorer, all that analytics can be built into Power BI, which is going to bring us over to our other guest speaker, Niharika. She's with Quorum Cyber. And Niharika, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sergio. I'll quickly pull up the slides. I hope they're visible. So we have just been talked around the introduction around the Microsoft Information Protection Scanner, its use cases, and lately the live demonstration of the scanner, scanning the repositories and so on. So I'll straight away jump into walking you through how we can leverage the scan results or outputs of the MIP scanner to produce dashboards that can be utilized to generate relevant insights into data residing on on-premise repositories and file shares. These insights could either be consumed or could be used to derive different strategies to mitigate the identified risks from the scan analysis. So I'm here to spend some time talking how we can monitor the status of MIP scanner, discussing around various reporting options, and then visiting some of the best practices and key considerations when deploying or utilizing MIP scanner in your environment. So this slide here presents some of the commands that can be utilized to monitor the status of MIP scanner service, which provides information about scanning start time, information about the node running those scans, and the time from which the scan has been running. So these are the little snips which have been captured from the scanner itself, some from the Microsoft Purview. So the one which are in blue are basically the partial commands which were run to export the status of or get the status of the MIP scanner service. So the commands which reflects to gain insight about the current scan summary, the information about nodes running those scans, and providing the information about how many files were scanned, number of files classified or labeled, how many files were failed due to various different reasons. For if you talk about, for example, the scanner was unable to open the file due to permission issue, unsupported file formats, and things like that. The status of the scanner service can also be monitored in Microsoft Purview, as I was talking around in the snip which is shared there. So monitoring ways or commands are not just limited to these which have been presented here on screen, but it's just the presentation of those commands which are basically used in general purposes. So this was all about monitoring status of MIP scanner. Now moving ahead with how the output files looks like when the scans get completed. So this is a representation of how scanner files look like. So these output files can be found on the scanner itself. So there are two files that gets created. One is the text files whose snip is here. and one is the CSV files. So the text file, which includes information about when the scanner was started, its duration, and the repositories that are being scanned. It also provides information about the actions taken on the content or file, such as persistent labels or application of labels or protection status and so on. So this is pretty much which sums up the high-level details about the scan, which is provided in the text file, which gets created. But just to caveat here, the report or the text file or any of the report does not actually capture the size of the files or the individual repository it's scanned, as there is no way to do that today. But what we get is the overall total size scanned in the summary report. So moving ahead with the CSV files, which contains most detailed information about the scan in terms of the insight about the repository, file name, status of the scanner, whether the file was scanned successfully or skipped because it was already scanned by the scanner or failed due to various reasons like permission issue or unsupported format of the file or things like that. Then it also contains information about sensitive information types that contained within the file, the current and the applied labeling, if any, or protection if it was applied to the to the file or it actually contained the protection already, and most of all, the age of the file, that is the form that is in the form of the last modified date. So this information contained in CSV provides a lot of value add when utilized to build reports on top of it, which we'll be talking through in a while. So when talking about the reporting, the first one option or the first initial option, as Sergio was demonstrating as well, is the built-in reporting. So events generated from the AIP Unified Labeling Client are pushed to the Activity Explorer and Microsoft 365 Audit Log. These events can be exported externally to any of the CM solution or any of the reporting solution. So the Activity Explorer snips are being presented here. So it is basically Microsoft's simplest view to monitor various events related to on-premise MIP scanner, filtering those down to file discovered, label applied, label change, protection applied, as we were just watching in the demo, and so on. So Activity Explorer is not only just limited with the logs of the on-premise scanner results, but also brings events from the other Purview solutions like data loss prevention, information protections, and so on. There are around more than 30 filters, if I'm not wrong, to search through the content that help refine and filter the data that you actually intend to see. So Activity Explorer is a great starting point in its sense, but it is limiting when it comes to generating reports on the top of data it produces, because it doesn't really allow exporting the data with that required level of details and don't really allow the capability to manipulate that data to gain the actual insight, which are actually gained from the CSV file when putting the Power BI on top of it. So acknowledging the limitation with Activity Explorer, the best route for interpreting and visualizing data is the Power BI tool or the Power BI dashboards. Now, to utilize that, it is important to understand how to get that data in the tool. So to achieve this, there are two ways. First is to use the CSV files, and the second is to leverage M365, as I was talking earlier in the previous slide. The way M365 can be leveraged for reporting is through the Management API. Now, if you're using the Management API to pull out the data we get in Activity Explorer, you need to create a platform to actually hold that data. So you could do that through log analytics. For example, you could have Logic app to pull the data out of the Management API, ingest that to the log analytics. This is an exercise which is to be performed on a regular basis. So this is good if you've got an incremental scan running, but it's not so great if you are doing big scans. This is because it becomes a little challenging using the API with regards to its limitation, particularly with Power BI. For example, if you're using the audit log, there's a throughput challenge with the API. And then if you take a look at API, or take API, ingest it into log analytics, and then put it into Power BI, there's a lower limit, or I'd say there's a row limit as well, which is around 500K row limit in what Power BI can interpret on a regular basis. So with these limitations, it works, but what we tend to favor is using the CSV files, not only because it is easy to use with Power BI, but also utilizing CSV, as I was mentioning earlier, gets you with the last modified date of the documents, which you can only get in the CSVs. You cannot get it in the cloud. And since last modified days is probably one of the key bits of the metadata, and since last modified days is again on premises, so the CSV is the best way now to utilize that data to determine the age of the content that is stored in your on-premise repositories. So there are different ways to utilize the CSV files, and each has its own benefits and its challenges, but they are easily overcome. We can easily overcome those challenges, and if then does give you a simple platform to use, which is the Power BI. So the first here, which is demonstrated here, is where you put the Power BI on the CSV file straight away by just doing get data CSV and pull it in. Once that data is being ingested into Power BI, you can then manipulate it easily to customize the dashboard and work through the data by visualizing it. This process of utilizing Power BI as a platform works well with small size data when you're running recursive scans. But when it comes to running the scans for the first time, which creates a large data set, it doesn't really work. This is because CSV file end up with creating 60 million records and more in itself, and it's not possible to open that big file in the Power BI. Definitely not without a huge VM in Azure doing a lot of processing for you, which is just not efficient. So for POCs or pilots, this is really simple and the easiest way of utilizing those CSV reports and creating Power BI on top of it. The second method here is taking the CSVs, putting them into a form of a storage, and then putting reporting tool on top of it. Now, given that we do have SQL Server, when we deploy the IP scanner, so that SQL Server could be utilized to host the data. So to get that data from CSV to the SQL Server, there's a need to do some ETL. So ETL is basically extraction, transformation, and loading. That's either going to be merging all the CSV files you get from the scans into one, which could be done using PowerShell, and then dumping straight into the SQL. Or it may be that you can use the ETL, which would be an SSIS package or SQL Server Integration Services package to extract that metadata within the metadata. From within the metadata. So it would then drop that into SQL Server. Once data is in the SQL Server, you can point Power BI at it and it pulls the report out. To caveat here, the processing time here in this process is a little time consuming or a little more compared to the other processes because it's quite a lengthy process as the SQL Server could be slow, particularly if you're utilizing the IP scanner service or the server, which is not geared up to perform a lot of ETL processing. So what we found effective for larger data sets is to use the cloud. So ultimately, what we need is to take all the CSVs and dump them into the Azure storage. And then we use the Azure data factory over the top to do all the extraction, transformation, and loading that data into Azure SQL, and then pointing the Power BI at it. Once you have got the data into Power BI, the ability to then manipulate that data is quite simple because you can introduce a lot of visuals that can help you make a lot of sense of the data and make it far easier for you to interpret that data. With that, I can quickly show you in the last couple of minutes what the report could look like, which I've opened in the background, and I'll quickly bring it up here. So this is basically how the report looks like. So just to mention around this report is built with the dummy data and is not related to any of the organization and is only for the demo purposes. So here in this, sorry, I think I messed the screen. Give me a minute, I'll bring it back. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, that's good. So in the left here, it shows the total number of files which were scanned, out of which it shows that how many had processing errors or how many were actually processed. This visual here provides you the details of the list of the repositories those were actually scanned, so which talks around cross-bar engineering, course, bar operations, USA, EMEA, and so on. The visual on the top mentions about the files containing sensitive information types. So these are basically classified into categories like PII, financial, technical, and medical. So these categorization has been done utilizing the Microsoft built-in sensitive information types. So the visual here reflects the most identified sits within this organization of the data is the PII. Then here is the visual presenting the file category or the file types contained within the scanned or on-premise repositories. So here this graph, which is the most important one, is the one which talks about the age of the data in the organization based on the year in which the data was last modified. So how it works in the background is like if a document is created in, for instance, 2019, but it's modified in 2024. So the date of the document, the modified date of the document reflects or updates to be the current date. So the data is not reflected in the date documents contained for 2019, instead it is reflected to 2024 in that sense. So this is how the age, we can determine the age of that content depending upon how frequently the data has been interacted with or how fresh the data has been created. So this is really useful in analyzing the amount of data which is old and contained within the on-premise repositories, potentially because there is no deletion mechanism in place within an organization and various other reasons. So the aged data actually represents a risk of over-retention of redundant content. And as the data only expand with years, the view initiates a consideration for cleanup or the old data or the stale data. Here in this place, it also brings up you the file details or the file names, which you can actually drill down. If I drill through this and get the file details, so you get the file details here. So it shows you the name of the file, the last date on which it was modified, what data category it was, the extension of the file, the repositories in which this file belonged to, the status of the scan, whether it was a successful scan or something which is failed or so on. And then it also provides a list of the sensitive information types which is actually contained in that very file. So you can drill down these files or any of those files specific which interest you the most in order to understand what kind of data is contained there, what are the sensitive information types which are actually comprised in that very document. Moving ahead with the retention of the content. So this representation here provides the age of the data across the scanned repositories. So if you can see, there are different repositories which are presented here, and this lists down the file age by across all these containers. If you want to drill into specific repositories, we can do that by clicking on this one, and then we can get an insight around the content which is contained in those repositories and how old or what is the age of the content there. So what we can do here is we can look into those specific repositories or identified repositories which might be containing significantly old data, and then assess them again for over retention, or consider deleting or cleaning up of data if it is stale or no more required within the organization. Moving ahead with another tab, which provides you the visual around the sensitive information types that is contained within the organization repositories. So again, you can drill down under these repositories and look for what all sensitive information types are contained in each repositories, how old that the data is, or how old that kind of sensitive information type is contained within those on-premise repositories. So storing significantly old sensitive data could actually lead to data handling issues, resulting into compliance and regulatory risk. So this really provides a good insight to work upon to mitigate those risks in, identify risk in those areas by visiting those top repositories or the top identified repositories which contains most of the sensitive information types or most of the the stale or old content within the organization. This here provides you, the breakup of from the container wise in terms of categorized into medical PCI finance, PII, or technical credential data. So you can definitely specify it as per the organization, how it is actually, I mean, how many sensitive information types there within the across the organization. So this lists down, or this provides you an information around how to visualize, or if there is any particular sensitive information type category you need to first focus on, for instance, whether it be PII. So you can drill down into PII and specifically locate in the data which is PII, or we can visit the repositories in here to understand what kind of data is contained there, and then work upon those actions to mitigate the risk, the potential risk which might be identified, after visualizing the results of those scans. Next here is the classified information, which talks about basically the breakup or the breakdown of labeling within the organization, or would say labeling on the files which are contained on-premise repositories. So this helps you to build an insight around the repositories where auto classification of these documents could be targeted to enhance data protection. For instance, if you find any repositories, or if you drill down any of the repositories where you find where you're expected to see labeled documents, but they are not labeled, so you can push the auto labeling policy depending upon the licensing you're holding. So if you're E5, you can fully, you're authorized to, you get you get the capability to push the auto labeling to the on-premises services or on-premise setup as well. Also, it provides you an insight of if any document with highly sensitivity label is stored on-premise repositories where it should not be actually stored. This is because data from on-premise repositories can easily be downloaded to endpoint devices and can be exfiltrated to portable device. So to mitigate that risk, this could help you derive the strategies to implement appropriate data handling policies or endpoint, considering implementing endpoint data loss prevention. The tab here around the data types. So here, this is the representation is the breakdown of file types identified across the organization. This could help building an exclusion list of those file types which are existing in the environment but cannot be processed by the scanner due to unsupported file formats or whatever reason it could be. So this is specifically, could be useful for the organizations which are containing significantly old data with file formats which are actually not supported by the scanner anymore further on. So this representation of the file types of file A depending upon the year in which the data was last modified in here, this one. So it provides you the information about when it was actually modified depending upon the file types and these bifurcations. Moving ahead with errors, slides on the errors. So it's a representation which highlights the files which were not actually scanned due to various issues, as well as mentioning, wherein the scanner could not find the file, and it could be possibly a SMB or NFS issue, not allowing to open the files, or could be a connection failed issue, a permission issue, or protected files, and various other reasons. So this helps us to identify where the challenges are and where is actually we need to focus on, as information around those files could be achieved by these scans. Okay, so that was all from the demo perspective. So as we saw that the value we gained from the value we gain from actually having those reports or having those results or from the exercise is how you actually leverage that information to make improvement within your data security and compliance posture. So with that, moving ahead, we're discussing some of the best practices and key considerations when deploying and utilizing MIP Scanner within your environment. So in order to ensure efficient and secure scanning of your on-premise data, the first and important thing is to understand your data in terms of identifying which are the key repositories within our organization to focus on. Once that is identified, it is recommended to begin with a pilot in discovery mode, which is to initially run the scanner to access the type of information contained in the repositories, and then planning to utilize the scanner capabilities for the labeling or protection to that data. Then the reports of the scanner should be regularly reviewed to monitor what is being discovered and if there is any need to adjust any of the configurations or policies to maximize or optimize the usage of those scans. Further down here are some of the key considerations to optimize the scanning of data, which is to utilize the maximum or minimum CPU settings on MIP labeling client to control the performance and responsiveness of the nodes which actually runs the scans. Next is on the debug scanning, which is the only way to get the information on the age of your data. So when using debug reporting, be mindful it will take significantly longer, perhaps double the time for a scan to complete, because debug will produce massive, results files that can be difficult to actually manage. Next, I would like to touch upon auto-labeling settings, which can allow you to reduce the overhead of the nodes, as the AIP scanner can inspect any files that Windows can index. So if sensitive labels or sensitivity labels are actually configured to apply automatic classification, the scanner can label discovered files with appropriate classification or optionally apply or remove the protection. Now, on that note, just to mention that not all sets are compatible with AIP Scanner. For instance, the medical sets. So you may need to visit the link mentioned in the references to identify those. Or you can also consider creating your own sensitive information types as a method to improve on the experience by just manipulating or tweaking the existing sets or the existing Microsoft built-in sets to optimize the accuracy. So it's important to understand the capabilities of Microsoft Information Protection Scanner and take some time to plan your environment, understand the volume and size of the repositories, and then deciding upon the level of the insight you actually want to achieve from those scans, and then choosing or picking the right reporting solution, which would be the most suitable and efficient to you as an organization. So that was all from my side. These are some of the useful resources which I utilize to produce this deck, which you might find useful when considering for the development of MIP Scanner and exploring various reporting solutions and capabilities. Thank you for your time today. If you have any questions or would you like further information on what you have discussed today, please contact us directly or use our contact us form email address, which you can access by scanning the QR code on the screen. So I hand over back to Sergio to bring up his resources and then close the session.
Excellent presentation. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, real quickly, how to get started with Microsoft Purview. We have our Microsoft funded partner-led workshops, some of which are our co-pilot readiness workshops, data security workshops. If you have unified support, you want to do some workshops with unified support, we have the Workshop Plus, as well as the Activate Microsoft 365 and Compliance for DLP and insider risks. We also have fast track assistance, and there you can have a dedicated SME that can provide guidance on implementing best practices as you adopt Purview solutions. So, schedule a meeting with your SLG compliance specialist to get more live demonstrations. Just email right there. And, don't forget, you can do a trial of some of your E5, G5 compliance. So be sure to take advantage of that. And just a few important links here, our technical resources where we were looking at those prerequisites for the IP scanner, some instructions on how to do the install, as well as how to get into some of those scan jobs, where to get the IP scanner download, as well as the troubleshooting. So good information there. This recording will be available in our Microsoft SLG Security and Compliance YouTube channel. So, feel free to look at all things Purview and some of the information from prior webinars that have been recorded. And if you haven't already joined, please join our Microsoft Purview customer community for SLG. A lot of good information. Now, April is a unique month. Normally we do one of our webinars once a month, but this month in April, we have 2. So be sure to join the next webinar. It's going to be April 25th, where we're going to be looking at Copilot for Security plus Purview integrations. Tony, over to you.
Thank you, Sergio. Have all the questions been answered in the chat window? I know you, Sergio, and Richard have been answering questions. I didn't know if there are any that haven't been answered. I just figured let's cover that off. Okay. No, I'm assuming no response means everything's been answered. So to the audience, are there any questions? If there are any questions, please feel free to come off mute and ask your question.
Hi there. At the very beginning, there was a mention of, I believe, a solution for scanning an IP range for shares. Could you provide any information on that?
So Sergio,
Yeah. Could you come again? Sorry.
Oh, yes, sir. At the very beginning of the presentation, I believe there was a mention of a solution for scanning IP ranges to identify overexposed shares.
Okay.
And I was just looking for if there was any additional information. I didn't catch a name or anything for that.
Scott, there will be an email that we send out. I will look over that. I did hear that as well, where there was some options. I'll see if it is something in preview. We do come across a lot of new features that come across our desk, so we will. I'll take that as an action and send it out with our emails.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. So we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to close out today's session. But thanks to all the presenters for your great content and delivery, and thank you to the customers for attending. Look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Take care.
Excellent. Bye, team.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.